Learners with blindness or low vision, Chapter 12. These are the learning objectives for the chapter. And some of the key terms that we will become familiar with. Okay, so before we move on to the definition and other information about blindness or low vision, there are some terms that we need to know, such as the visual acuity, which basically means how sharp a person's vision is, how much fine detail can they see in different things from a certain distance. And we've all heard that 20/20 vision is perfect, right? So what this means is that the normal visual acuity of a person who does not have any kind of eye problems or visual acuity problem is 20/20, right? Or in some areas it's also called 6/6 vision. So what it basically means is that a person can see details from 20 feet of distance, right? So it's fairly sharper to them as compared to somebody who has vision problems. The other term that we need to know is called field of vision, or FOV. And this is basically the entire area that a person is able to see when their eyes are fixed in one position. So for example, if you're looking straight ahead or looking down your nose, whatever peripheral vision you have, meaning that whatever you can see from the side of your eyes, right, that is included in your field of vision. So for example, the normal field of vision is 60 degrees towards nose and 100 degrees away from nose if you are looking down, right? If, for example, if you look at this example right here, this illustration, you can see that the person is looking down, right, towards their nose. And so they can see 100 degrees from the side of their eyes, and they can see 60 degrees below towards their nose, right? So this is their field of vision. And then if somebody is looking straight ahead, they can see 60 degrees above and 75 degrees below. So there's another illustration which shows this person looking straight ahead, so they can still see things which are 60 degrees above and 75 degrees below. So this is their field of vision. So this is for people who have no vision problems. So for the definition of blindness and low vision, we will actually look at the legal or the federal definition and also an educational definition. So the legal definition of blindness depends on measurement of visual acuity. So a person is termed as legally blind if their visual acuity is 20 by 200 or less with correction, right? And with correction, I mean that they may be wearing glasses, lenses, or have corrective surgery. And the field of vision should be less than 20 degrees. Okay. And based on our legal definition, a person who has low vision or is partially sighted will have visual acuity between 2070 and 2200, again with correction. And the field of vision varies for people with low vision. Okay. On the other hand, the educational definition of blindness is based on how well students can function in the classroom with whatever sight they have available, and they focus more on reading. And students are considered blind if they are able to read Braille. And for those of you who are not familiar with what Braille is, here in this picture you can see an example. So these are basically dots that are raised on paper, and people who are blind can use their fingers to read the alphabets or the sentences. So for a student to be blind, based on the educational definition, they must learn to read Braille. Okay, and those who have low vision, they can read large print, right? Either if it's through using some device, a magnifying device, or books that are printed in large print. And many students who are legally blind are not educationally blind because they can read the large print. So that's the distinction between the legal definition and the educational definition. And here I would also like to mention that teachers who work with students who are blind or who have extremely low vision are specifically trained for that, and we call them the teacher of the visually impaired. So they're the TVI, and most schools would have a teacher who comes in and work with these students certain times of the week or certain times of the day, or they may have one permanently for their particular school. So it differs from school to school. And here are just some examples so you can visualize what different visual impairments look like, or people who have vision impairments see, how they see. Okay, so this is our normal visual field. So for somebody who does not have any visual impairments, will see a picture like this. On the other hand, if they have impaired peripheral vision, meaning that if their field of vision is limited, then they may have tunnel vision where they can only see certain parts of the picture. Okay, and then they may also have the impaired lower visual field. So others may have blind spots where they see the entire picture, but then they have some areas which are blackened out, like spots. So these are just some of the ways that people with visual with vision impairment would see. Prevalence. And if we go back to the chapter where we talked about low incidence and high incidence disabilities, we, based on that definition, will see that blindness is one of the least prevalent disabilities in children. About 0.05% of 6 through 17-year-old of student population, they are classified by the federal government as visually impaired, and this again includes blindness and low vision. And blindness is again a low incidence disability, and it's 10 times more prevalent in adults than in school-age children. And then again, children who have certain other disabilities may also have blindness or low vision. For example, children who are born with the Down syndrome, a majority of them have very low vision. So how do we see? The anatomy and physiology of the eye are very complex. We can see in this diagram right here, there are not just one thing, but there are several things that are involved. The visual image, whatever we are seeing, becomes an electric impulse, and it's passed through the optic nerve to the visual center of the brain, right? But before reaching the optic nerve, the light rays reflecting off the object passes through the cornea right here, the lens and the pupil, and then it comes to the focus of the retina, which is this part right here, before it's sent to the optical nerve and to the brain. So if there's anything wrong, malfunction, injury, damage to any part of the eye that is used for the purpose of refracting light, a person might have either blindness or low vision. And here I have a video which shows you how we see things, right? And the link is here, but the actual video is also available under this chapter. Identification of visual impairment. And keep in mind that when we talk about visual impairment, we are talking about both blindness and low vision. So the visual acuity for far distances is measured most often with the Snellen chart. And for those of us to have our eyes tested every year, we are pretty familiar with what a Snellen chart is. This is a basic chart that consists of rows of letters of E's in different positions and sizes. And each row corresponds to the distance at which a person with normal vision can discriminate the letter or the direction of the E's. So if you look at this right here, you will see right here it says 2020. So if you have a normal eyesight of visual acuity 2020, you should be able to read this without corrective lenses or with glasses, right? But as we go higher up, right here where we have the largest letter E, we see the visual acuity of 2200. So going back to the definition, you can see that this is something that will be seen by people who have very low vision, right? Anything lower than that would be constituted as blindness. So this is the most prevalent, most frequently used way of identifying visual impairment, but this comes with certain limitations as well. First of all, this does not measure acuity for near objects, right? We cannot depend on this measure, right? So we have to use other assessment methods that must be used to determine if or what kind of material a person can read. And we are going to talk about what we use in schools. And the other limitation is that the visual acuity may not correspond to visual efficiency. So what do we mean by visual efficiency? It means that the ability to control eye movement. And we are going to talk about certain disorders which limit eye movements. And last of all, acuity may not correspond to use of vision in natural settings. So the fact that how we see in natural settings, how we use our vision or what degrees is of useful vision we have is not measured by the Snellen chart. When we see things around us, they have varying sizes and shapes, and that is not accounted for with this way of identification. Vision teachers can observe visual efficiency and perform functional assessments to determine how students use their vision in everyday situation. So we conduct something called the functional vision assessment or evaluation. Basically, this is for people who have or students who have low vision, and it measures again how well children use vision to perform everyday tasks. So we are looking at things like what is their visual acuity at near distances, how well they can read or how far they can see, what's their visual feel like when they're in a classroom, are they able to maintain gaze on an object, or is their eye moving around, or are they not able to control eye muscles or eye muscle movement. And then are they able to scan things, meaning that are they systematically examining an area when done with the task. How is their color vision? Can they differentiate between different colors? And again, how well is their eye-hand coordination? And then how well they can track an object with their eye. And then if they prefer one eye as compared to the other. Okay, so all these things are included in our functional vision assessment. And as you can see that a Snellen chart or a physician who does eye test cannot look at all these things in context of everyday living, right? So teachers perform this functional assessment. Okay, so I have an example of a sample assessment, and you can look at this PDF document on Moodle under the section where we have the videos. Causes of visual impairment. So the most common visual problems which affect both children and adults include the light refraction errors, because remember we said that sight involves refraction of light. So if there are certain errors in that area, then we may have something called myopia or nearsightedness, hyperopia or farsightedness, or astigmatism, which includes blurred vision also. We see a lot of people who wear glasses or contact lenses just because they have these conditions. These problems can typically be corrected with glasses or contact lenses. But there are some more serious problems which typically include disease or damage to any part of the eye. These are more common in adults than in children, but some children may also experience these. So we have glaucoma, cataracts, diabetic retinopathy. So other conditions that primarily affect children include things which are prenatal. So within that we have something called retinitis pigmentosa, which is a hereditary disease resulting in the degeneration of the retina, and it usually causes tunnel vision and night blindness. Then we have the cortical visual impairment, or the CVI, and this is believed to be due to a dysfunction in the visual cortex of the brain and results from brain damage or dysfunction. So this is a neurological disorder. Here I have a link to a website from the Texas School for the Blind, and here that they are talking about, or they've given like an introduction of what CVI is. So please take a look. And then we also have disorders which are related to prematurity. So we have something called the retinopathy of prematurity, or ROP, which basically results from a scar in the tissue which is behind the lens of the eye, and this happens when the premature infants are given excessive concentrations of oxygen. And improper muscle functioning can also cause certain visual problems such as strabismus, and which is commonly called the lazy eye, and this is a condition in which one or both eyes are directed inward, right? And then we also have nystagmus, which is a condition in which there are rapid involuntary movements of the eye. And here you see an illustration of the strabismus. Psychological and behavioral characteristics. Although many authorities believe that blindness does not alter one's ability to understand or use language, there are subtle differences in the way in which language usually develops in children, especially infants who are visually impaired, in areas such as delay in language, because their first words tend to come later. The reason may be that it may take them longer to discover that words have symbolic functions because they're missing out on that visual part of it, right? Because how babies learn to talk involves looking at things and then pointing to things, and then parents may say, oh, this is a ball, or do you want food, or things like that, so they can correspond that words have some meaning. Comparing the abilities of those who are blind to those who are sighted, we must keep in mind that it is virtually impossible to find equivalent tasks for making comparison, right? But from whatever comparisons we are able to make, we have not found any evidence saying that blindness results in lower intelligence. And we base this on when they take their standardized intelligence tests, their performance of children who are blind or with those who are sighted does not have much of a difference. However, there are some differences in conceptual development because children in visual impairment, they rely more on their touch than reading or other ways. And infants may lag behind their sighted peers conceptually, but they may not last long. Persons who are blind must take initiative to pick up information from the environment as compared to people with sight. And research has shown that early training in the use of strategies to help children with visual impairment in using their senses of touch are most effective. So the earlier we start training children who have visual impairment, it's better for them. Orientation and mobility are important for the successful adjustment of people with visual impairment. And we talk about orientation, meaning that how well they can navigate through their environment, right? And mobility, of course, how well they can move around given the obstacles within a certain setting. They also depend, or their orientation and mobility skills depend largely on spatial ability, how well again they deal with their environment, with spaces, with objects, and so forth. And some persons with visual impairments have the ability to detect physical obstructions in the environment and ability to detect subtle changes in the pitches of high frequency echoes as they move toward objects. And this is called the Doppler effect. Some people may say that if they have blindness, their other senses are very acute. Their hearing is much better, so they pick up sounds much better. And then basically, it's some people say it's a myth. What I think is that because if they don't have one sense, they are overcompensating their other senses. So they train these other senses to become more acute. It is difficult to compare the academic achievement of students with visual impairment with that of students without visual impairments because the conditions that they are tested under are different. The way their tests are administered or the way they work on the tests are different. However, evidence shows that students with visual impairments achieve lower than their sighted peers, and some professionals suggest that the cause may be that they were not exposed to Braille soon enough, because remember we said that students should need to learn, who are blind specifically or have very low vision, should learn how to read Braille, right? And with respect to reading, we do know that learning to read Braille is somewhat similar to learning to read print. For example, that they do need to know the different alphabets, they do need to know the phonological aspects of the language. So those kind of similarities exist between reading print and reading Braille. Although personality problems are not an intrinsic condition of visual impairment, the social skills that come naturally to persons with sight may be more difficult for persons without sight, right? Because they find it difficult to read subtle visual cues such as facial expressions, right? When a person is angry or upset or other experiencing other emotions, we use our facial expressions, right? Raising the eyebrows or smiling or things like that. So it's because students who are blind or have extremely low vision won't be able to see these cues, so they cannot respond to these cues in the similar manner, and that is why social adjustment may become a problem. Another reason is the society's discomfort with blindness. Children who are sighted may find it difficult to relate to students who are blind, right? Even if they're sitting next to them, they may not know how to talk to them or how to initiate conversation. What do they talk about? Things like that. So people in general are uncomfortable around people who are blind. Stereotypic behaviors such as body rocking or eye poking are somewhat common among students with visual impairments. Not all of them, but a certain number. With these behaviors, when they are displayed by students with visual impairment, may not be socially acceptable by other peers, right? So they may have problems adjusting to that. And as far as the stereotypic behaviors are concerned, there is a disagreement on should we intervene, should we reduce, eliminate these stereotypic behaviors. But then again, when we talked about stereotypic behaviors with the students with autism, we know that these were there because maybe the student feels calm when they are using these or when they're doing these type of movements. So again, the same thing. Children who are blind or who have visual impairment, maybe these behaviors are calming to them or help them in some way. So do we reduce them? Do we eliminate them? We don't know. Educational consideration for students who have visual impairment. Although most educational experiences in the classroom are visual, many experts agree that with some modification, the general education principles that apply to teaching students without visual impairments should apply to teaching students with visual impairments. So we can make modifications in the following four areas: the use of Braille, use of remaining sight, listening skills, and orientation and mobility. So students who are blind, we have already talked about that the focus is to learn Braille, right? We have the standard literary code or the alphabets, and here's a picture of what they look like. So there's a system based on 6 dots, and for each alphabet a certain dot is raised on paper. So we have that standard literary code. Then we also have something called the Nemeth code, which is basically for math and science expressions in Braille. So it's a little bit different than the alphabet. And so we have like the symbols that we use in math or expressions that we use in science. So it's basically for those. Then we also have something called the Unified English Braille or the UEB, which basically represent all subjects except music. Right? And here's a link where you can find some more information about the Unified English Braille. And then I also have a YouTube video which shows you how students read Braille, and this is also available in the video section of the chapter. Here's the Braille which is used for the musical notes. And there are some tools for writing Braille. So we have the Perkins Brailler, which is like a regular typewriter which you used to have a long time ago. I don't know if any of you remember, or you may have seen one in your homes or read pictures of that. So here where you see the keys, these are the Braille keys, and then the paper, the whenever they press a key, the dots are made on this paper right here. Then a simpler tool is the use of slates and stylus. So here we have the slates and the stylus right here, and in this picture you can see how it's used. So down here is the paper, so we stack up the papers here. If you can see here, all the Braille alphabets are here. So what you do is you just put holes using the stylus on the slate, and that's how the dots are made on the paper. And then for students with low vision, we can modify instruction by providing them large print books, either using magnifying devices, or now that we have the iPad and other tablets available for students with special needs, we can use software that can magnify the print on the screen. So we have all those things. And then again right here you see a keyboard and adaptive device where the letters are enlarged for people with low vision who can still use the computer to type. And you can see the comparison. This is the enlarged alphabet on the keyboard, and this is the regular alphabet on a regular keyboard. So these kind of devices are available for students who have low vision. And then teaching listening skills is also important to educational programming, because now most material is available in recorded versions, right? You have books on tape and things like that where they can listen to instead of reading. Here are some other adaptive devices. Again, this is this one is kind of similar to the Perkins Brailler. You have the keys and then you have all your alphabets down here, so it prints out a paper once you type them, or you can see them right here. And then this is another adapted keyboard where the Braille alphabets are actually on top of the key, so it's just an overlay that you can put on any regular keyboard. Advocates have lobbied for availability of Braille through IEPs, through the Individualized Educational Programs for Students. One such association is the National Federation of the Blind, who have made these recommendations that were passed into bills, and that Braille instruction must be available in schools, and then teachers need to be specially trained to be proficient in Braille. And Braille is also being recommended now for people who have low vision, but their vision may be worsening over time. So at some point they're expected to lose their sight completely or be legally blind. So it will be very important for them to know Braille. So the other area of modification we consider is the orientation and mobility training. Orientation and mobility skills are critical, and training can involve teaching the children how to use the long cane, which is the most effective and efficient orientation and mobility aid. We start teaching use of this long cane as early as preschoolers, right? So in the early intervention centers, they may learn how to use the long cane. Guide dogs are also one way of training for orientation and mobility, and these dogs are trained to alert the owner to dangerous areas, and they are not typically recommended for children, but adults mostly find them helpful. Tactile maps is an aid which can be used for people with low vision or blindness, and these are embossed representation of the environment with raised symbols, for example for buildings or for streets. And this is right here in this picture, this is an example of a building's map, right? Personally, I have never seen these maps used in public places. Like for example, we go to malls, we see the directory or the layout as a printed version, but I've never seen anything like this, right? We do see braille used in elevators or braille used for room numbers. Like if you go around campus, you would see on each room, wherever you have the plate where it has the room number, on at the bottom of that you will also see the room number written in braille. We would have it in restroom and all other areas, but as far as having these maps in public areas, I personally have never seen one. Maybe you guys have experience of seeing one like this, but these are really useful. And on this hand we have a tactile map of a terrain of a city. So these can be helpful, so you can have mountains and rivers and valleys and so forth, whatnot, to teach children in your geography classes or any other class that they may need to use a tactile map like this. So these things are very useful even for other than orientation and mobility. And then last of all, we have human guides, which are not recommended as a primary means of mobility, but they're helpful at times. And here I have a website which tells you the different techniques for guiding people who are visually blind. Because just think about it, if you see a person who is blind and you think that they may need help, you don't just grab their arm and pull them to wherever they want to go. No, there are specific techniques. Like for example, you first of all you need to ask them if they do need help, right? If you don't know them, they follow you, so you are in the lead and then they hold on to your elbow, right? So you never grab their hands, or unless of course they're in some dangerous situation. The infusion of technology has created advances for persons with visual impairments in two general areas, right? First of all, communication and information access has become more easy for them as before, because they can access large print through the software available. And then orientation and mobility has also improved for them. Some examples of technological aids for communication and information access include braille note takers, personal data assistants, and we have the descriptive video services and screen readers for computers. So we do have these things which convert written material to speech and things like that. And as far as orientation and mobility go, we have the GPS, the global positioning system, which helps them detect obstacles in their ways. But although we do have all these technological aids, we need to be cautious about the use of technology, because what if the person becomes dependent on these and a certain technology is not available to them when they leave school, right? So they would still have to learn how to read braille, how to use the long cane, or just the basic tools that are available to them, that are more easily available to them. So we have to figure out whether technology is going to become a hindrance for them, or is it going to be beneficial for them in the long run. The four major educational placements for students with visual impairments are residential schools, general classrooms with itinerant teacher services, which is the most popular one. And if you go back to our early chapters, when we talked about itinerant teachers, and remember that these are teachers who go around to school campuses, right? They are not there the entire school day. They may come in once a week, twice a week, or however many times. we have special classrooms. So on a given campus, you would have a special classroom where all the children are with some form of visual impairment, and they would have their specialized teacher with them. As far as residential schools go, we have very few of them. Students actually live there. Just a little over 6% of students with visual impairment between the ages of 6 and 21 are placed in residential institutions. And then again, you will have also the availability of a resource room for them where they just go where when they're pulled from their special class or from their general ed class and go and work on specific skills. Assessment of progress. The Individuals with Disabilities Act, the idea requires that Braille instruction be included in the IEP for students with low vision or blindness. Progress monitoring of achievement can be done through curriculum-based measurements for gauging their academic skills. There's also the need to monitor functional skills and quality of life because orientation and mobility can pose many obstacles for people who have blindness or low vision. The way this is done is typically through checklists, which the teacher or parents can go through, and also self-reported data. So students can report, okay, these things work for us or these things don't work for us, and they can do evaluate their orientation and mobility skills that way. However, accommodations may be needed because assessments performed in Braille typically take longer, so you will have to make accommodations such as providing more time, having an assistant available, or providing them the test in larger print and so forth. Early intervention. Intensive intervention should begin as early as possible, and like I mentioned before, that orientation and mobility training can start pretty early. And here's again an example of the Texas School for the Blind and how they are teaching preschoolers skills for orientation and mobility. And while they are in early intervention centers, they can be in an inclusive setting, which is beneficial because it is important that the teacher facilitate interactions between students with visual impairment and sighted students as early as possible. Early intervention efforts should focus on parents' interaction with the child and with their reactions to the child's disability. So that's a very important factor in early intervention. And then again, we need to provide support to the parents, train them how to work with the child when they're not in the center and when they're alone at home with the child. Transition to adulthood. Independent living and employment are two most important areas of focus for education for adolescents and young adults with visual impairment, because most people who are blind can lead very independent lives. While they are in school and we are doing all these transition programming for them, we need to make sure that they become familiar with the services that are available to them or will be available to them once they leave high school. Most members of the society often mistakenly treat people with visual impairment as helpless, right? And then they create an environment which is conducive to fostering their dependency. They try to do everything for them rather than let them take care of themselves. So for this reason, it is very important for people who are blind or have low vision to learn to be independent. There's also this myth about the superhero type or superhero abilities that people with blindness have, and this is very stereotypic because not all people who are blind would have skills, for example, such as superhuman strength or a highly acute hearing or things like that. Some researchers say that people who are blind or have low vision are either unemployed or are all overqualified for the jobs they get, right? And the reason that they say is that there was inadequate transition programming at the secondary school level. Once people with blindness or low vision have jobs, there are certain accommodations that are needed for them. So if you provide them that kind of opportunities or training while they are in high school, it'll be easier for them to adjust to their employment situation when they do get out. Accommodations such as improved transportation, better lighting, computer software applications that they can use at work, can help improve the employment opportunities for individuals who are visually impaired. And that is all that which we can do while they're in high school. And here are some resources that I've listed here, so take a look at that if you need more information about what CVI is, or about the Texas School for the Blind, or how what are the guidelines and standards for teaching students with visual impairments in Texas.